Okay, so hi everybody. Couple of familiar faces, which is always lovely to see. Rally and I are going to just provide a little bit of an overview about some research that we've been undertaking in relation to developing a taxonomy for learning development and academic language practitioners. So just to introduce myself, I'm Steve Briggs. I'm Director of Learning and Teaching Excellence at the University of Bedfordshire in the UK. Rally, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yep. Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you. My name is Ralitsa Kantcheva, and I'm the Senior Learning Development Tutor at the Academy for Learning and Teaching Excellence at the University of Bedfordshire.
Brilliant. So
Steve?
just to kick off with a little bit of context, if we just move to the next slide, please, Rally. One of the things that we've seen in the UK, and then this was really interesting because it came out in one of the sessions that I attended yesterday as well, is there seems to be a prevailing lack of understanding amongst many within the higher education sector in relation to what is the work of learning development practitioners. It remains an area that doesn't necessarily seem to be particularly well understood. This is despite obviously significant efforts for those working in the field to communicate, explain, demystify what a learning development practitioner actually does. Now, one of the factors that I would suggest contributes to this is a significant inconsistency in the way in which learning development practitioner roles are titled and organised, structured within different institutions. So just to draw a couple of examples, a learning development practitioner may be called a tutor, they may be called a lecturer, they may be called an advisor, they may be located in a library, they may be located in a teaching and learning unit, they may be located in a student support unit, they may equally be based in faculties. So in that context, it's quite probable that someone might be familiar with what learning development is in one institution and move to another institution and learning development looks completely different. Now, keeping that in context, we work within this field, we understand the nuances, we understand the differences, but for those that perhaps are working on the edges of this, I can see how that's really, really confusing and doesn't particularly feel consistent in terms of what it is that learning development and academic language, I'll extend with that as well, is actually all about. Now, when you compare this with other professions, so such as a librarian or a psychologist, these fields have recognized taxonomy of job roles. So, for example, in psychology, you could be a forensic psychologist, you could be a clinical psychologist, you could be a health psychologist. And that's recognized, certainly in the UK, by the British Psychological Society. Likewise, librarians recognised by their professional body. You could be a librarian that works in a school. You could be a librarian that works in a public library. You could be a librarian that works in higher education. You could be even a librarian that works in a prison. So again, when you go and have a look at these different associations, that there are recognised taxonomies that describe what different subdivisions of these roles look like. Now, with that in mind and sort of reflecting on the field of learning development, what Rally and I have sought to do is to start to explore whether it's possible to develop a similar taxonomy for the role of those working in the field of academic language and learning development. So we were very fortunate. We were awarded some funding by ALDinHE for 24-25 to undertake a research study to start to establish what it is that could be part of a taxonomy of academic language and learning development practitioner roles. Now, what we want to stress is this taxonomy is not intended to be exhaustive, but rather typical. We feel that if we try to include every possible permutation of learning development and academic language, it will become too complicated to be able to effectively articulate what it is that this field is about. So the focus has very much been on typicality. What are the most common ways in which these roles manifest? So if we could just move on to the next slide, please, Rally. This is sort of conceptually the way that we're seeing this. So for those that aren't familiar with the third space, The third space describes individuals that work in a role that transcends the traditional academic and professional service dichotomy. So individuals that work as learning developers, librarians, learning technologists often don't neatly fall into the traditional academic and the traditional professional service. They sit in the middle. So at a top level, we would say those working in the field of academic language and learning development, knowingly or unknowingly, are under this umbrella term of third space practitioners. And there's been a recent issue of the Journal of Learning Development and Higher Education, which has a really excellent focus on the third space. So if you're not familiar with this, it's well worth having a read through that to familiarise yourself with it. So moving then one level below this, you then have this concept of a learning development or academic language practitioner, someone that's working within the field. Now, this is where I think we are at the moment. And this is where I think some of the problems start to come in, because if you're a learning development practitioner at University A, and you compare this with a learning development practitioner at University B, we're both learning development practitioners. We're both operating within the same sphere of LD. However, our roles could be quite significantly different. And this is where I think a lot of the confusion then starts to creep in for individuals that might be looking at learning development at this second tier level. So what we're proposing, if we could just have this animation, is do we need to start to introduce specific sub-specialisms relating to the role of academic language and learning development practitioners that provide a greater specificity as to how an individual in that role is undertaking work within the field of academic language and learning development. So if we could just move on to the next slide. So what we want to do in this session is share with you the work that we've done to date in relation to this. So we have developed a taxonomy of academic language and learning development roles, which we would like to share, and we'd love to get your thoughts, your feedback and your reactions to that. We want to particularly discuss the comprehensiveness of the taxonomy. Are the role categories that we're proposing sufficiently broad? Do we think that this will apply in different international and institutional contexts? And based on the feedback that you provide today, Rally and I will continue to consider how we might develop this further. We have got at the moment a journal article that's been considered in relation to this, but we very much see this as something that will evolve. This is a starter for 10, and no doubt there'll be opportunities to expand and elaborate this over a period of time. So if we could just move on to the next one. This is what we've done. We have administered an online questionnaire over the Christmas period. Huge thanks to colleagues from ICALLD in helping us to do that. We sent this out to ICALLD members, inviting people to take part in it. Rally will talk a little bit about the response rates that we've had from this, but we were delighted to get some good response rates from across the ICALLD membership. The questionnaire included, amongst other areas, a number of specific questions related to job role responsibilities that were typically undertaken by an academic language or learning development practitioner, and also some questions whereby we wanted academic language and learning development practitioners to identify where they had a particular area of expertise related to working within this field. Now, it's possible individuals may have had multiple job role responsibilities, they may have had multiple specialities. That was absolutely the kind of information that we wanted to collect and to understand. We collected this data through a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods. Now, I'm going to hand over this point to Rally, who's just going to talk through a little bit about what it is the data has started to show us.
Thank you, Steve. So we have administered the questionnaire, as Steve has mentioned. It was 20 questions, and they were split across 4 different sections. We started with some demographics to help us identify subgroups in the data. Then we moved on to asking colleagues to share their principal job responsibilities and to try to identify an academic skill specialisms that they regularly work in or that take the majority of their working time. And then we ask them to share any routes for professional development, recognition and promotion that they're aware of or that are available to them directly in their own institutions or jurisdictions where they are performing their professional duties. All of the sections had some rating questions, so some tick boxes in a way, and a number of open text questions, which allow us to get rich information from colleagues about the context of their specific working environment. So if we look on the right here, there is a summary. Overall, we had 92 participants from across the ICALLD members, with the majority of them coming from the United Kingdom, but quite good representation from Canada and New Zealand as well. So using all of these data, as Steve has mentioned, we've tried to come up with a list of the principal job responsibilities. So what you can see here are the major job responsibilities. The top 3 of these come up in more than 50% of the participants, and they are not surprisingly co-curricular student support. So this could include individual appointments, generic workshops which sit outside of the curriculum, or drop-in sessions when students just bring their work and most burning questions related to their studies. This is supplemented further by developing learning materials, either for online guides, usually on an institutional website, or to support teaching in the curriculum. And then the last part from the top 3 is teaching directly in the curriculum, so directly embedded sessions that relate to a specific area of study. The next ones that complement, I guess, the top, that have covered at least 20% of the participants or more, are academic development, which is in a way seen in a lot of our conversations with colleagues when we're trying to help them develop their own work and their own pedagogical approaches, as well as educational development when we might become part of the curriculum design, supporting students and colleagues with understanding the assessment criteria as well as the marking rubrics. Interestingly, in some of the ICALLD members, colleagues who work in this area also have significant duties in the area of personal academic tutoring and peer-assisted learning coordination. And the last one is team management. So we've looked at all of these and we've tried to simplify or collapse these down. So we've looked at the top 3 because they seem to have covered, as we said, more than 50% of the participants, and they seem to take a significant amount of our time. So we try to represent these 3 as a cluster. And we've thought that a good way to combine all of these together is to call them academic skills teaching. So if we combine all these together into a single job responsibility cluster, and then we bring the other 5 top clusters, then we end up with those 6 areas of job responsibilities. We've used those to create a specific part of the taxonomy that you're going to see in a minute. Using the same method, we've looked at academic skills subspecialisms. So in the survey, we had 29 subspecialism areas which were identified on the Learn Higher website. And just like before, we've tried to look to organize these subspecialisms into a macro-specialism cluster. So people who were mainly working in the area of academic writing seem to also have a strong correlation to working with note-making or note-taking strategies, helping students to learn how to write for university, and in particular, colleagues who work in the STEM disciplines, they were working with the report genre, which is unique for students who study in STEM. Then the second macrocluster that we've identified is around self-management. And as you could see, this brought together time management strategies, independent learning, quite often motivation strategies were part of this, as well as learning at university and how do you transition from a previous educational institution if you were coming directly from high school, or maybe if you are transitioning from an area of practice, professional practice, and how things are different at universities. So there are 3 other microclusters that we have identified here, and I'm not going to read through them. I'm sure you guys are capable of doing that. But we also found 2 unique macro specialisms, which are listed here on the left: critical thinking and reflection. So 45% of our respondents use this as a major part of their working day, but this uniquely didn't slot into any macro specialism cluster. And similar was with oral communication. We had almost 30% of our respondents working in that area, but those 2 areas seem to be standalone. So we felt that they're still very important, and that's why we've decided to include them in the final taxonomy, which Steve is going to share with you now.
Thanks, Rally. So this is what we've come up with. 2 parts to this. The inner donuts, the multicolored donuts, is where we've included the 6 areas of operational foci. So as Rally said, looking at the principal responsibilities that people reported, these are the most typical principal responsibilities associated with working as an academic language or learning development practitioner based on the responses that we received through the questionnaire. Around that, the grey donut then focuses on academic skills specialism. So again, as Rally says, this is based on some clustering that we were able to do to identify top level areas of specialism that individuals have. Now, what we're saying with this is, this is typical. It's not everything. And one of the things that came out in the session that we were delivering yesterday, which certainly resonates with what Rally and I was thinking as well, is where is maths and stats? We thought that would be one of the academic skills specialisms in the grey donut, but based on the responses that we received, that didn't surface. Now, it may be that maths and stats is seen more as a specialist subject area, and people identify more in it as a subject specialism rather than as a facet of being an academic language or learning development practitioner. We can speculate on that. Perhaps that's something people want to discuss today. We'd certainly appreciate your thoughts and views on that. But that certainly was an area that we had thought would be an academic skills specialism, but didn't manifest. When you've got this taxonomy, what we're also saying is you may have more than one area of operational foci at any one point in time. You may have more than one academic skills specialism. However, what we would suggest is if you have many academic skills specialisms, you're probably more likely a general practitioner, because what we found in some of the responses that we were getting is individuals were suggesting they had many specialisms across those learn higher categories. And certainly my understanding of a specialism is it's 1 or 2 areas that you really have a very deep, in-depth understanding of, not a breadth of everything. So if someone identifies and says, oh, I've got that, these are all specialisms, we'd say, well, actually, at that point, you're probably more of a general practitioner rather than having a particular specialism in an area. Thinking about career trajectories, if you're working as, for example, a learning technologist before you moved into the field of LD, you may identify as having digital as a particular specialism based on previous studies or previous career history. If you worked as a librarian before becoming a learning developer, you may, again, based on previous training, previous areas of work, identify as information as a particular specialism. Likewise, if you were an English as a second or other language tutor, you may identify writing as a specialism. So this isn't just about work whilst operating as an LD or academic language practitioner. This could also reflect previous training, previous qualification, previous work experiences, and what you're bringing into the role of working in learning development or academic language. Another example might equally be interpersonal. Were someone coming in from a counselling, coaching, mentoring type background, again, they may see themselves sitting more there. So this isn't just meant to capture what you're doing in the role, it's reflecting on what you're bringing into that role and what your background might be. Okay, so what Rally and I are now going to do is just sort of talk you through a little bit about our journeys, our career journeys, and where we see this taxonomy applying to us as our roles have changed over a period of time. So for myself, many moons ago, I worked as a learning development tutor. Most of what I was doing at that point was one-to-one appointments, generic academic skills workshops, a little bit of on-class teaching, but mainly generic, certainly a lot of authorship of academic skills learning materials. So going back to what Rally presented earlier, those top three areas where we had the most responses that we grouped as academic skills, that was my principal responsibility. It was all in those three areas, the work that I was doing. Now, my background is in psychology, so I wouldn't have said that I immediately had one of those grey circles as an area of specialism that I was coming in with. However, given the nature of work that I was doing at that point, and I was working this role for about 5 years, the lion's share of questions that I had were around writing, how to structure assignments, how to plan assignments, proofreading strategies that could be adopted, how to adopt different writing styles, the like. So I would have described myself at that point as developing through the role I had some emergent specialism around writing in the context of learning development. Now, my role changed, and I then became a senior learning development tutor, which then also became a head of a learning development team in due course as well. And when the role changed, I continued to do some academic skills work, but it was much diluted because I became much more involved in managing the team, operational planning in relation to what we were doing. So I would say at that point, my principal responsibility was team management. But alongside that, I still had this academic skills strand, but on a much more reduced basis from what I was doing previously. But in essence, the work was still the same. The nature of the work change meant that I didn't really continue to develop this writing specialism. I became much more of a generalist because at that point I was supporting people who might be writing tutors, they might be maths tutors, they might be involved in elements of digital literacy support as well. So my breadth became much more all of those areas to some degree, jack of all trades, if you will, rather than a master of one specific one. Then about 4 years ago, I changed role again. I became a director, initially of a library and more recently a learning and teaching unit, although currently acting for library again. So in terms of my principal responsibilities, this is where LD changed for me quite significantly. Team management remained a common thread, but the nature of my role has meant that rather than doing academic skills support directly with students, I'm now working at how we can embed that across the institution in terms of our practices. So some examples of work I've done: curriculum framework review, worked very hard to embed learning developers into that and making sure that learning development is very visible within our curriculum framework offer. That includes, for example, positioning the LD team to be part of co-creation, working with course teams, working with other third space, teaching learning professionals to look at how we can enhance and enrich curriculum and assessment. So in that sense, my role is focusing more on educational development. I'm also heavily involved in a lot of policy development. So again, looking at how learning development can be woven in and integrated into that as well. I would also say I'm doing increasingly bits of academic development. That might mean I'm going in, I'm providing training, briefing, development support to course teams or to schools or to faculties pertaining to different aspects of my role, of which learning development is a core part still. And again, in terms of a specialism, I would say I am now very much an academic skills generalist. I have knowledge that cuts across all of those areas. Through the role I've had more recently, I've certainly increased knowledge around digital, I've increased knowledge around information, but certainly in the context of where I see myself, it's around all of those areas rather than having a particular foci on just one particular specialism. So I'll just hand over to Rally for her to share her story with you as well.
Thank you. So I started many moons ago as a postgraduate training officer. And at that point, I was one of the coordinators for a peer-assisted learning initiative at the University of Leicester. Through that, I also had one-to-one appointments with students. I had to deliver generic workshops as well as to develop some online resources. So my principal responsibility was split between coordinating the program and academic skills teaching. And the majority of the workshops and the resources I was developing were around the self-management cluster, so transitioning to postgraduate studies, time management, as well as oral communication, and all the different areas that in that cluster. Then I moved roles. I went to University of Bangor in North Wales, and I became a study skills advisor with a STEM specialism. So again, I was heavily involved in teaching, but this time a lot of my teaching was directly embedded in the curriculum, and the majority of the resources I was developing were directly related to the units that I was teaching on. Through my previous educational experience, I had a very well-developed knowledge in the area of mathematics and statistics. So I became an academic skills generalist, helping students with the whole array of different queries they had, and also preparing different sessions for the different units I was teaching on. But I was mainly specializing in mathematics and statistics when it came to the team members, while other team members were focusing on writing or on oral communication. Last year, I've moved to a new role, so I became a senior learning development tutor at the University of Bedfordshire, and with that role, I also started to have team management responsibilities. But I still do a lot of the academic skills teaching. I do teach on different units. I develop resources along with my team, or specifically with academics and students who are struggling with a topic related to their studies. So I had retained my academic skills generalist specialism, and I have also expanded on the mathematics and statistics support that I provide to students. So although team management has come into the mix, at the moment my LD responsibilities have remained pretty much the same. So I think it would be great now if you can share with us a little bit about your own journey on the taxonomy, or do you even recognize yourself on the proposed taxonomy? And I'm happy for you guys to unmute if you want to share live or to chat, share something in the chat by writing. And if there's any questions as well, please feel free to ask live or to type in the chat. Thank you.
Who's going to be brave and go first?
Yeah.
I'll go first.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Go for it.
Yeah. So, well, thanks so much for sharing this. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been in and out of these. Well, I've been sort of sitting in these sessions since. Well, what are we doing? It's about 9 hours now. So My brain's probably not working as well as it could do. But I think for me, if you're looking at a broad sort of sense, what might come under the gamut of the work we're doing, I think a lot of it's in here. Something that I do that's probably a bit more nuanced. I guess it's more of a mode than a specialization. Is how do we sort of make good choices about what the design of our online materials versus the design of our classroom materials, and then for online, what do you put in a video versus a static page, that sort of thing. Where would you see that sort of area of focus?
Yeah, I think probably in educational development.
It can,
So I think as a function,
development.
Education development was a specialism digital. So I think it would cut across the two. And I think, sorry, Riley, I didn't mean to interrupt. Did you want to carry on?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So in the terms of educational development, we were seeing that's around the design and delivery of curriculum, design, delivery of assessment. So what you're describing, I would see very much as being part of that process. It's providing specialist guidance to course teams around how to best design and deliver their courses. So again, the breadth of what an academic language and learning development practitioner might do within that, I think is huge. But that's where we would probably see it sitting. But given what you're describing as well around, it sounds like specialism in instructional design, use of digital technologies, I would see that as probably then having a specialism focus around digital as well. Does that make sense, Mark? Do you sort of recognise that as a distinction, would you say?
Yeah, I just wonder if it gets, I mean, I'm being a bit blunt. I wonder if that gets lost a little bit in the taxonomy as it is, just in a sense of it's probably an area of knowledge that we, as a profession, don't all necessarily bring with us, right? So,
No, and I think that's fair. I mean, I think certainly in terms of the way we're describing it, I think we are trying to be typical, and I think that's where we've certainly positioned this, because I think if we became too nuanced, it's just going to become so complicated. And one of the things that was discussed yesterday, which I thought was awesome, and it's certainly in line with my thinking when we were discussing this could be a really cool sort of career development type tool as well, because you could present this to someone and then you could have the conversation to deconstruct it. So if we're talking about education development, what do you mean by that? What are your strengths? So it's meant to sort of help frame what you do, attach language to learning development that hopefully others would recognise, but certainly also facilitate conversation around that as well. Did anyone else want to share sort of any observations or thoughts? I see we've got some chat comments as well.
Sorry, I can't see the chat because I'm sharing at the moment.
And I think just to pick up Karina's comment, I think that's really interesting about how you would perceive your specialism versus how your institution might perceive your specialism. And I think, again, specialism could have a duality to it. It could be that by virtue of your role, people will assume you're a specialist, but you may say, well, actually, my specialism is much more located here. And I think that, again, is around trying to help empower people to demystify what might be stereotypes or assumptions that people make about individuals working in LD based on the job title, rather than actually the value, knowledge and experience that somebody has in terms of doing it. Claire, I can see you as well. You've got your hand up. You also said in the taxonomy, do people have to pick just one? No, I think potentially somebody could have multiple operational foci. I think for specialism, you're getting more than a couple. I think you're becoming quite generalist, I would argue. Specialism really is meant to be one thing in detail. But you had your hand up. Did you want to come in as well on that?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that same question. Also, we've talked around in a couple of other sessions around co-design, and actually that is an L&D area to help teams with, and I wondered where that would fit on this.
So co-design should be in academic educational development, I would say.
Yeah. So again, when you're saying co-design, do you mean with academics or do you mean with students or both?
Both, but my focus is mainly students.
Okay, so in terms of the way that we framed the curriculum framework at Bedfordshire, there's a co-creation strand, and that would be course teams working in collaboration with students, teaching and learning practitioners, and industry. So I would see that as part of an educational development in terms of how are you co-creating your curriculum and your experience. If there were other parts of co-design, so that could include, for example, peer-assisted delivery, that might spill into AL, but I think it depends on the nature of the work. So again, some of these things are a bit nuanced rather than just it's that. But certainly, if you're looking at it in the context of curriculum and assessment, I would say education development. Absolutely agree with Rally.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, and if nobody else wants to share anything on this by speaking, we do have two other questions. So to what extent do you think this taxonomy applies to your current learning development context? And how could we further test and potentially expand this work? Any ideas? We are very happy to hear them. Or if you'd like to share in the chat as well, you're welcome to do that.
I'm just still reading through the chat comments, Rally, and one that's interesting is from Georgia, which is around values. And again, ALDinHE obviously has a set of values. And it may be that this sits around everything as sort of an extra circle, that you have these values that are generally the way in which you work, the way in which you operate. So I think that's a really interesting idea, Georgia, is there may be another level around this of values that perhaps would need to be considered. In terms of role and voice in boards and institutional bodies, sorry, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in on that, Georgia?
Maybe explain where I'm coming from. I mean, I would describe myself as probably your generalist category. I don't have a lot of experience in learning development. I'm kind of in my third year in the role of study advisor at Reading, but I would say kind of the core activities that kind of are included in my role have to do with supporting students in kind of all these various different kind of ways. But another part of kind of our team strategy, let's say, that now seems to be taking more and more time from kind of all of us in the team is trying to kind of have a voice in different boards and different working groups at the university. And that's not necessarily always linked to an outcome that involves us in, let's say, assessment design or curriculum design, but it's more around, I don't know, kind of strategic decisions, being aware of what's happening more broadly and where the university kind of is going, but also trying to influence that. To the extent we can do that, kind of increasing the visibility of our team as something that I think that can contribute towards that. The best example I can think of recently is our kind of generative AI group, where we have representation and we were able to kind of include kind of our voice and kind of moderate some of the enthusiasm other people had and so on. So yeah, that's what I'm not sure where I would classify this type of activity. And I don't know what other people, what your experiences are and how this translates to what you do.
I wonder if that taps into the conversation around values, just more broadly, that one of the values is around espousing what is learning development and being an advocate for the field of learning development and championing it as a way of approaching teaching and learning. So I think it's probably one that Rally and I need to go away and have a think about, because I don't think it's a specialism. I don't think it's an operational foci. I think it's more of like a philosophy or ethos, or something with a value set, but it's sort of more at the heart of what you're doing. And it may even be perhaps that is the center of the donut, the middle donut, that actually the values sit at the heart of everything. And if you don't have the value set, that's an issue, or it could sit around it. I think that's interesting. It certainly wasn't something we specifically looked at in this research project, but again, one of the things that we're really keen to do is to look at how this might evolve and how this might develop. So it might be a second iteration of this includes consideration of what are values that underpin some of this work as well. I think with values, though, in my view, it's not a I do this value, this value, this value, this value. It's you do the values or you don't do the values. So I think again that would be a distinction with this. One of the things that I think we also wanted to sort of put a bit of a call out is to develop this further. We'd love to look at potentially working collaboratively with colleagues outside of the UK. We got some good responses from Canada and New Zealand in particular, but we really are wondering, do we need to perhaps put a little group together to take this further forward, where we have some representatives from beyond the UK that perhaps we can work in partnership with to really help us test this more thoroughly, particularly outside of the UK in an international context, and start to think about whether there might be elements that are more nuanced and perhaps there's been a degree of unconscious bias based on our nationality, our familiarity, particularly with the UK higher education system. So if there is anyone in this group that thinks, oh, that might be something I'd be interested in, and you're sitting beyond the UK, but please do reach out to Rally and me as well. I mean, as I say, the intention is we'll have a publication out about this hopefully quite soon, but certainly I don't think this will be a kind of one and done. I think this is something that we could grow and we could develop, and it would be wonderful if this could emerge into something that perhaps there was an ICALLD endorsement as a sort of maybe a most national approach to conceptualizing the areas of work, and possibly even an international framework around things like CPD and development opportunities. So I think there's some quite exciting things we could do with this, but we would need a little bit more international representation, I think, to fully realise this. Thanks, Mark. That's awesome, and certainly we've popped our emails there, so perhaps we can make contact in due course to consider how that might develop. That would be really, really, really cool. Just seeing if there's any other final comments as well. Yeah, I think that's a good one, Amy. It's as I say, ALDinHE has a set of values, but I suppose my first question is, do those values translate to all of the other ICALLD institutions as well? And if you're trying to develop an international framework, do we need to think about what are international values rather than perhaps what might be UK-centric values, or do we test the UK-centric values internationally to see if they would resonate? So I think, this is based on feedback from international participants. I think rather than jump straight to a predefined value set, I'd want to consider what they might be globally, and then that would be fed in rather than just put ALDinHE values around the edge. But again, would welcome any other thoughts on that. Okay. All right. Well, I think
I would add, in countries like New Zealand, probably Canada and other countries that have got indigenous populations, and the students that we see are representative of those populations as well. That probably is something that would be good to work out how to integrate and fold in.
Yeah, it would be another level, wouldn't it? To what is the global international value set around academic language and learning development? And then again, it's not a role taxonomy as such, but certainly is an engine or an ethos that drives the work of individuals around the principal accountabilities around the areas of specialism. That to me, the more I'm thinking about it, I think it's more at the heart. It's that centralized ethos. But again, if you were using this as a CPD capacity, helping someone to realise and understand that ethos might be another area that you would consider. Okay, well, again, I'm conscious we've reached the end of our allotted time, so thank you ever so much, everybody, for taking part, joining, and really interesting conversation. And again, thank you, everybody, for your time today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, Steve. Cheers. Thank you, Ralitsa. Yeah, that's great.
No worries.